Folks, dignitaries, countrymen, this is the Screen Watching Podcast. It is not just it is the destination to know what it is you're going to watch on your TVs, on your big screens, on your mobile phones, whatever you're doing around the place. Each and every week, you have to, it's not a matter of do you want to, or could I, or perhaps. It is, you must check out this podcast. We have the reviews. You will not know what to press play on unless you hear what I, Dan Barrett, have to say, and to a lesser extent, Simon Foster, my co-host. But folks, this is what you'll be pressing play on over the coming, I'm not going to tell you how to live your life. This is what you're going to be talking about. You're going to be talking about Emilia Perez. It is the new to Australian cinemas, but released internationally like months ago. Big Academy Award nominated thing. People are going to be talking about this. There's also going to be discussion about Wolfman, which is playing in cinemas. We Live in Time, a film that I'm desperately keen to see, but just haven't bothered yet. Unstoppable. Simon, is this the Train movie? Is that what you're talking about?
I'm not talking about the old Train movie. No, I'm not. That's very much J-Lo-y.
You know what? That Train movie, it's pretty good.
It's really good.
I'm going to be doing a bit of a deep dive into, because frankly, Severance Season 2 screeners haven't been made available. I'm going to be taking a look at the SBS On Demand grab bag that I've got here for you. A Finnish dramedy called Mr. 8. Folks, you will not know what this is unless I tell you what it is. Honestly. Everyone Else Burns, which is a comedy from the UK, which is streaming now in Australia. Also, I'm going to put it out there, one of the top 5 greatest TV shows in the history of American television is now available in Australia, finally for the first time, brackets, in 20 odd years. It's called Homicide: Life on the Street. We're going to have reference to American Primeval. We're going to talk about Ghostlight, one of the best, if not maybe the best movie of last year. Good one, Joe Parra talks with you. Folks, a lot of titles, and we can only do that if we play the opening titles.
This is not like TV, only better.
Television! Teacher, mother!
Secret lover.
What, that's it? That's your movie?
Well, I said that I had an idea for a movie.
This is, of course, Screen Watching. I'm Dan. This is Simon.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Dan Barrett. Yes, as you can tell by that introduction from Dan, I'll be talking about 3 new cinema releases, Amazon's #1 movie of the week, and Netflix's new big-budget TV series, American Primeval. Dan will be relating to us what it's like to sit with him on a couch when he has the remote. So I'm looking forward to every one of those things that he's talking about.
Simon, I'm a little disheartened to think that you're only talking about an Amazon thing because it's the #1 movie of the week. Why wouldn't you talk about Beast Wars or Mr. Beast Wars? Was that what it was called? Mr. Beast Games?
What you're talking about?
Mr. Beast Games, the #1 show in Amazon history.
Well, we're getting into game shows now. Maybe we could work in some reality TV. The new Maths cast was announced this week. Check out our social pages for a rundown of who's who on Maths. That'll make for good reading. We really should have a Maths special episode.
Sorry, is this the Married at First Sight? Is that what Maths is?
Yeah, I like the way you feign lack of knowledge of it. I know you're a big Maths
Simon,
fan.
I'm not a 14-year-old girl. Okay, folks, we are going to dive right into it. Folks, there is the big movie of the week, and next to that, Simon's instead going to talk about Emilia Perez.
Are you English?
No, I'm not English. Why?
No, because you you are pretty.
Simon, before you get started, and I'm kind of curious, why isn't Wolfman the topic of conversation? And I only asked this because I was trying to work out before I looked at the run sheet what will be the movie that Simon talks about, and I was convinced Wolfman because it's, traditional horror, scary stuff, and Simon, you love horror, scary stuff, so why not Wolfman and why Emilia Perez?
I would say that there's nothing like a good horror movie, and Wolfman is nothing like a good horror movie. So that's probably sums it up kind of.
That ticks the box. Okay, Emilia Perez, let's go.
Yes, Dan Barrett, you're absolutely right. In your introduction, you said it has taken a while for Emilia Perez to make its way to Australian screens. I would suggest that's because this is a movie, unlike any other movie I've seen come down the pipe in a long, long time. It would have proved, I can imagine local distributors would have taken a look at this and gone, oh my God, how do we market this? Let me give you a quick rundown of what the plot is.
Sorry, Simon, can I just ask a question? What marketing's been done for Emilia Perez Down Under? Because from what I've seen, not very much.
It's kind of everywhere, Dan Barrett, and if you run in certain circles, and this is clearly not a mainstream release, but it is a film that has a high want-to-see factor amongst maybe some of the more highbrow of us around the traps, which is a shame because it's a film that deserves to be seen by a much, much wider audience.
Look, I'd actually suggest the film's been seen pretty broadly across the US because it's been on Netflix. The Netflix audience, I think, have jumped on this pretty quickly, and then in the way that Netflix audiences do, stop paying attention to it 3 days after it was released. But I mean, as you said, like, there's obviously, this is a film that's a big deal in film circles. But what frustrates me as a viewer is I would have liked to have been part of the conversation around Emilia Perez back in November last year when this film was released into the US. I don't understand why it's been released and waited, like, it's mid-January and it's got a very low-key release into Australian cinemas. And the only reason it's got any real heat behind it is because it's an Academy Award frontrunner, and like cineists are certainly excited by this, but I'm just genuinely frustrated that this movie has kind of come out so late in the piece and with such little fanfare.
I disagree. I don't think it's got little fanfare, but I think it's a film that is following a very traditional marketing path for films that are not especially mainstream, but do have a lot of award season buzz. It's already featured very heavily at the ceremony that we don't dare speak the name of, and it is going to be a front runner at the Oscars in the weeks ahead. Maybe when this podcast goes out, I think the nominations are out this weekend as we record this, so I'm not quite sure when we'll know exactly.
Is it this weekend? I thought they got delayed, although maybe this is the delayed date. I'm not sure. The fires have definitely hampered things.
So let me run through very briefly why this has proved such a daunting marketing sell for not just Australian distributors, but distributors around the world. The wonderful Zoe Saldana plays Rita Castro. Now, she's a frustrated, very underappreciated lawyer living and working in Mexico. She captures the attention of the head of a cartel, Juan Manitas del Monta, played by the wonderful Carla Sofia Gascoigne. He is impressed with how she gets a man who clearly killed his wife, gets him off in a defense suit that sort of breaks new ground. He makes contact with her and says, I need you to help me undergo gender-affirming surgery and turn this very rough, violent man into Emilia Perez, the woman of the title, played also by Carla Sofia Gascoigne. She then has to go into hiding while she undergoes this surgery. Meanwhile, her family, led by her wife Selena Gomez and her children, believe that he has been killed. He doesn't share with Selena that he's undergone this surgery. And then many, many months later, she comes out of hiding, wants to reconnect with her children, but puts Selena and the kids under a great deal of danger by exposing that she was in fact once a very violent cartel boss. All the while, Zoe Saldana is running sort of defense for her as she begins to emerge from her self-imposed exile. Add to this that it's also a musical. Now that I know gets you excited, Dan, more than most people, being a huge musical fan as you are. The way that this...
So am I supposed to take that bite?
Sure. The way that the songs are integrated into this is unlike anything I'd seen before. You've probably got to go all the way back to... Well, I was going to say Moulin Rouge, but that was sort of kind of like a karaoke musical with songs that had. This is all original music. Some of them are, traditionally staged like musical numbers. Others have this very sort of surreal, almost dreamlike staging that speaks very much to what the characters are going through, which is the great thing about musicals. They can do that. But overall, it's unlike any film. The one film I probably would sort of compare it to was Annette, which was the Adam Driver, Marion Cotillard film that came out a couple of years ago, which was more a traditional opera in the way that it was presented. This one is a very hard-edged, street-level sort of look at life, both in the drug cartels and on the streets of Mexico. It's copped a lot of flack because it was shot in France by a French director, Jacques Audiard. It's copped a lot of flack from the LGBTIQ community for its portrayal of what that community believes are very sort of stereotypical gender identity issues, all of which are compelling and valid arguments to be made about this film. But the fact that a film like this gets made with Carla Sofia Gascoigne out front and does so in a way that has generated this kind of discussion, I think is a real plus. I think it is going to win over audiences when word gets out that it is the Oscar-nominated frontrunner that I'm sure it will be. It's playing the event cinemas and it's playing the Hoyt's Change. So I wouldn't say it's in limited release. It's not in sort of Marvel number studios, but it's getting out there.
It's not playing on the VMAXs, though. It's down like, Cinema 7 or 8 in your multi.
2 movies a week play VMAX, so it only gets 1 movie a week. So it is playing in a far wider number of cinemas than you'd expect a film like this to traditionally play in, which suggests that the star power, the Oscar nominations, the general buzz that's coming through the international and festival release should give this one a bit of a kickstart where it may not have otherwise had it.
Yeah, I mean, I assume most people listening to this podcast, though, are checking out at your Palace or your Dendy's or one of the other, boutique places.
Yep. And it runs long, but some of the scenes are so dazzlingly staged that I didn't feel the running time at all. This one, I saw this almost immediately after I saw Anora, and I was just so energized by the filmmaking and the fresh new look that these films had given cinema that I was just on a bit of a high from these 2 films at the time.
Yeah, it's interesting the response to Emilia Perez, where I think that it's got a very similar response to Anora in that there's a large contingent of people that really love the movie, but there's also like this sort of 15-20% sort of break off where people just kind of don't get it or are just really frustrated by it in one way or another.
Yeah, for sure. And that's very specific with Emilia Perez. Yeah, and that's very specific with... There are people who are just sort of artistically not on side with Anora, and I know that wasn't your cup of tea when we discussed it last week, but there are, like I said, there are very specific arguments being made against Emilia Perez for some of its choice of representation in the film, which only makes it more exciting to see and discuss and make your own opinion on. Is it getting... Do you know if it's getting a... So what's the deal with Netflix having it in the US... but it being sold territory by territory outside of that? Is that just does that happen very much? Because I always thought that Netflix was kind of a global thing.
No, it happens all the time. Lots of things get sold to just Netflix and it becomes territory by territory elsewhere. It happens pretty regularly. It's just that it's pretty rare that a film of this sort of cultural stature probably ends up getting a release like that. Yeah. And often it works in the opposite way in that things might get a cinema release in the US, but in territories like Australia, they just go straight to
Netflix,
digital.
Sure. Yeah. Yep, Get that.
Yeah.
All right. So it's in limited release around the country as we speak. And as I said, expect Oscar to throw its weight behind Emilia Perez moving forward. Probably more so than Anora, actually. Anora seems to have stumbled a bit, didn't win any of the awards from the ceremony that we don't dare mention.
So, I mean, okay, if we're going to talk about that, the more interesting awards to look at is maybe the BAFTA Awards, which the BAFTA Awards, not necessarily a great predictor for the Academy Awards, but are a little bit sort of stronger than the Golden Globes in terms of that recognition, that crossover. So last year's BAFTA, for example, I'm pretty sure that the majority of the major categories were predicted by BAFTA and carried over. The year before, that wasn't the case, if I've got my years right on it. So, it's a bit of sort of give or take, but certainly at the BAFTAs, this film did very well last weekend.
And also look at for a more sort of accurate look at how LA's going to vote. You look at the Guild Awards, the screen actors and the writers and the directors, because they vote for themselves in the Oscars as well. So yeah, you're right. The Golden Globe. Oh, I almost said it. That other ceremony is still a lot of fun though. I know you're a big fan.
That's fun if you like wasting 3 hours with no redeeming value. Anyway, folks, let's move on. I want to have a chat about things I saw on a little streaming service in Australia called SBS On Demand during the week. The first one, and this is probably a really good segue from Emilia Perez, it's a show called Mr. 8. Let's play a little clip.
7 erilaista miestä, 7 erilaista elämää. Se haluaa kaiken.
Mustasukkainen.
So basically what you've got with this show is there's this woman named Maria. She is dating 7 different men. Okay, and that's fine.
Sure.
So she has it all sort of worked out in her mind that, Monday she dates one guy, Tuesday another guy, and so none of the guys, they all know that each other exist, okay, but they, in theory, don't really have much to do with each other, just generally.
Other than her, yep.
Other than her. So it's very much focused on her. This is her relationship with these guys. She's out on a date she's supposed to be meeting up with one of the guys, and then he doesn't show up for whatever reason. She's in this restaurant alone. She ends up meeting this guy, Yuho, who is he's on a blind date, and she doesn't turn up. Anyway, they're kind of sitting near each other, and they sort of, move wine glasses over to one another and have a pretty good evening. And Yuho just, completely falls, over heels. He's mad for this lady. Okay, so, he gets in contact and he gets a little bit stalkerish in the first episode, which left a bit of a bad taste in my mouth, but it's supposed to be seen as fairly charming. And he sort of finds himself in Maria's world, where she's dating a different guy every day of the week. As they get a little bit further into it, you realize that this is a lot more structured than you would otherwise think. And this is where the show loses me a little bit. If this was a show about a guy who falls in love with a girl who's got a fairly unique poly approach to dating and has this sort of fairly accessible sort of group of guys who are like, yeah, I don't really mind that you're seeing other people, and they treat things with some, sexually sort of ethical behaviors and whatnot, like that's a fairly interesting, unique approach to a rom-com. Okay, but with this, it feels like look, I'm not going to say that I'm out there sort of banging the drum for the poly community at all. I've known a couple of poly people in my life, and, I kind of get how it works and how it can work sort of effectively and not particularly well. Okay, and those are interesting areas to explore in a show, but this show, it just kind of feels like they kind of came up with this idea of how would it really work if this woman was dating 7 guys at once? Okay, and the way that she ends up doing it is that she pays for them all to live in the same share house together, where they've all got a room there with their name on the front, as though they're 4-year-old kids. And
That is a very Finnish thing to do, though. Let's understand that.
I'm not going to impugn the Finnish people, but first of all, that's ridiculous. There's a thing where none of the men are supposed to really engage with each other, they're supposed to just deal with her. But how's that happening if they're all living in an assigned house? That's kind of ridiculous.
Now, why do these 7 men agree to do that?
Exactly.
Don't they all have other lives outside of this woman?
Yes. So in the first episode, the other guys, because they get together occasionally for meetings, so they can all talk about how they're going to rotate around Maria's life, as though that would ever be the case. Okay. There's a thing where they introduce Yuho, I think is his name, into the group, and they're like, hey, this is the rules or whatever. Make sure that you've got some interests outside of Maria, because you've got 6 days where you're left to yourself and you can only deal with her on one day. And so, that's all they ever
I've got to see this show.
But this is 7 men who are all in their seemingly going into their late 30s. Surely they're interested in dating and relating with other people, and it's not just Maria, who she seems like a perfectly lovely lady.
I was going to say she would have to be sort of a major pull. She would have to have some either physical or sexual or strength of personality influence that would create this almost cult-like environment.
Exactly. She's an attractive looking lady, but I don't know, does she have an enchanted vagina? I don't know. It's really hard to work out what the lure is here exactly.
That was my wrestling name in high school. Yeah.
It's a lot of life disruption for just she's not even a, pretty cool person. She seems a little bit boring just generally, but she's got a bit of cute magnetism to her, I guess. But is it that much? I don't buy it. Anyway, it took what was kind of an interesting premise and just made it stupid. But this is a show, there's 8 episodes of it currently streaming on SBS On Demand. The one thing I'll say the show has going for it is it's shot entirely in really gorgeous looking black and white. Okay, and that takes this sort of fairly terrible sort of execution on a fairly good rom-com idea and sort of gives it something else. But you do find yourself wondering, well, why is it black and white like this? Because it kind of actually takes away some of the energy and vibrancy from what should be a more interesting format.
What's it called? Where do you watch it?
SBS On Demand. It's called Mr. 8. And that's Mr. Hey, Mr. And then number 8 at the end.
Next.
Also, as I was flipping around on the SBS On Demand, I realised that a show that I'd been waiting for at least a year now since its UK release is now streaming on SBS On Demand. It's called Everyone Else Burns.
David, what's this?
That? The pie? I made it.
You're claiming you cooked this. You seared the mince. Mashed the potato. Turned on the oven.
Yes.
Turn on the oven now.
For years we watched Everybody Loves Raymond, and I still find myself catching myself trying to say, is it Everyone Loves Raymond or Everybody Loves Raymond? And right now I still can't say with 100% certainty. But this show is called Everyone Else Burns, and what's interesting about it is it stars Simon Bird, who people would remember as the briefcase wanker from The Inbetweeners back in the day. He's here because he's an adult man, Okay, he's now like in his... So he's playing this guy who is the head of a family who are a really puritanical, like, Christian family.
Oh, this is the Christian family. Yes, I did see a bit of this. This is pretty funny in parts.
Yeah, and it is kind of funny in parts. It's not amazing, but like it's perfectly pleasant. And it's basically a family that are expecting that the apocalypse is nigh, and so they kind of live their lives as puritanically as possible while also knowing that doom is upon them. Simon Bird has a very funny haircut. It's a bowl cut. And look, it's an entertaining comedy. It's nothing you're going to be recommending to your mates, but if you're certainly Simon Bird curious, as I often am, well worth a look. The one thing I'll say with Simon Bird as a performer is I don't know whether or not his success as a performer is hindered by the fact that David Mitchell exists in the world, or does Simon Bird thrive because he comes right behind David Mitchell? Because they're almost the exact same person.
Yes, big David Mitchell fan. Don't know Simon Bird, but if I can align the two, that's going to help me sort of deal with this show a bit better. I want to watch the rest of this, yes. I've seen bits and pieces of it and it looks quite funny, so yes, I'll give it a go.
Yeah, certainly good.
Good.
Yeah.
Righto, get to the big one. This is the one you're wanting to talk about. Let's go.
Well, it's not, I mean, it's kind of, I wanted to make a brief reference to it, but I was already in SBS On Demand land, so here we go.
It's never brief with you and Homicide, but let's give it a go.
No, well, all it is that we've talked about homicide life on the street for some time in this podcast, for all sorts of reasons, but most of all because it is one of those seminal TV dramas. So much of the rise of premium TV from the late 90s going into, the next 20 years were very much sort of built off the breadcrumbs that Homicide Life on the Street had sort of laid down. Like there was a foundational element to it from both the sort of cast in there as well as like birthing David Simon into the world of television. And so a lot of the things that you learned that you saw from him from The Wire and Generation Kill and all the other great TV dramas he's done, like he got his chops on the Homicide Life on the Streets TV program, and that carries through. And just the general sort of vibe that you find in his programming just very much comes from what Barry Sonnenfeld did in terms of establishing a visual style for Homicide Life on the Street as well. But why we're talking about this, a show which debuted back in 1993, this week, is that it's now available in Australia as of this week. It had aired in Australia, so Channel 7 had it years and years ago when it first debuted. They occasionally...
And buried it, didn't they?
Like middle of the day sort of programming, sort of unannounced.
Really?
What's that, sorry?
I recall that they kind of buried it either late at night, because I know we've spoken of this a long time, and I know that it's a show that it's revered as one of the best ever, but I've seen like maybe 3 episodes of it. I just never got an opportunity to watch it, whether it was because I was having babies or doing work or whatever it was, but I never got around to Homicide. It
was just a show that I was just playing. It's kind of like, how they talk about the Velvet Underground and how everyone who went and saw the Velvet Underground play went off and formed their own band. Everyone who watched Homicide Life on the Street went off and started blogging about TV and writing about TV or becoming a TV writer. Okay, it's just one of these sort of niche TV shows that it just kind of aired at the time, got some critical sort of buzz around it, but never really cut through to mainstream. It was always on the bubble, always close to being cancelled. You can watch as you go through the 7 seasons of the show, where the show changes and evolves based on trying to keep the network as happy as possible while still trying to maintain a certain amount of artistic integrity about it. Like, you can feel that tension within the program when you're watching it. But it was never a mainstream show, and when 7 screened it, it was like a summer burn off, and they aired like double episodes for a few weeks, and then it did well enough so that when the rating season returned, they dropped into like a, let's say Wednesday 9:30 time slot, or, Thursday night, late night or something. So we suddenly got the show here like fairly regularly and sort of fairly decent time. But like, no one was really watching it in a major way. But when the show went off the air, the legend, the myth around it sort of actually really built, and people who caught up with it again on DVD in the years that followed, or were just lucky enough to be in a territory where it managed to play on TV somewhere, like, people caught up with it and thought, this isn't too bad. And like, Foxtel had it here in Australia for a little while, but again, it was like burned off just on Arena at some point. But like, it hasn't been available on streaming, which is really the way that most audiences these days are catching up on these shows. And finally it is available. It's on SBS On Demand. You can find the first 2 seasons as of this week. In about 2 weeks' time, the next couple of seasons drop. And then by the early sort of weeks of February, you're going to find all 7 seasons there. But Simon, do yourself a favour and watch the first couple of episodes of the show. Let me know what you think.
I will absolutely do that. I'll get back and we'll mention on this podcast again sometime in the very near future, no doubt. All right, now you need to ask me a very important question, Dan Barrett.
Okay, Simon. Do you like walks on the beach? What's your horoscope? What else have you been watching?
Oh, what else have I been watching? I'm glad you asked. Okay, you mentioned it at the top of the show. Wolfman is the new big release this week. It is the movie that is playing on VMAXs and extreme screens all around our capital cities. It is the latest film from
Extreme screen. I always forget that's even a format.
Oh, it's a thing, baby. Leigh Whannel, the Australian director, has toured Australia, countrywide for the release of his film. He was at the screening.
Simon,
What are you smirking at?
Australia's more than just Sydney and Melbourne.
Not when it comes to the release of Wolfman. It's no. He's done the rounds, and he was at the IMAX cinema the other night where I saw this. So
In Sydney.
In Sydney and in Melbourne the night before. To your comment.
That's what I'm saying.
Look, sure. To your comment that I sometimes rate movies because I've been gussied up by the PR department and I've seen the film presented in the best possible way possible. This is why I say to you that's malarkey. Wolfman was given the full push, was given the IMAX big screen release, although that was terribly underlit, the whole thing. And what
if they lit it better, Simon? Would that have gotten you across the line?
No, it would not have. So what happens here is that Leigh Whannel, who made a really terrific new version of The Invisible Man a few years ago with Elizabeth Moss, and who has somehow adopted Universal's monster properties in the wake of the collapse of the Monsterverse that they were all talking about years ago when it was going to start Tom Cruise. They've now farmed out the properties to Blumhouse, and Blumhouse has employed Leigh Whannel to create these films. Now, Invisible Man was a terrific movie and had a lot of depth to the themes in there and a lot of great drama as well, and was really well acted. Wolfman, on the other hand, Leigh Whannel has come in at the last minute. It was going to be a Ryan Gosling, Derek Cianfrance, I think it's pronounced, film. They departed at the last minute. Leigh Whannel has come in to try to save it with Chris Abbott, I want to say, or is this Messina? No, this is Chris Abbott.
Christopher Abbott.
Yeah, Christopher Abbott in the lead role, and Julia Garner as the young wife who finds herself stuck in a outback cabin. And what you basically have is an old werewolf legend that's sort of painted with the indigenous culture brush at the start of the movie, but which is never spoken of again in the rest of the film. It basically becomes a werewolf versus werewolf movie where Julia Garner gets to watch them fight and eventually run for her life. And that's the entire film. It all takes place over one night. Now, we made the mistake of the night before going to see this at the IMAX of watching the 1941 Lon Chaney version of The Wolfman. For 69 minutes, it was compelling and at times very scary and beautifully made. All the things that this Wolfman isn't. Which isn't to say this is a terrible film. It's entirely watchable and will provide just enough sort of slamming door scares for people who've never seen horror films before. But in every other regard, this is a big step down for Whannel and the Blumhouse team. I hope they do better with... What have they got coming up next? They must have something. I guess they've got a Jekyll and Hyde movie they've got to get through at some point to keep those rights. So Wolfman, unfortunately, exactly what you expect from a late January release.
A couple of things. One, it's pronounced Blumhouse and not Blumhouse.
Okay.
Because of Jason Blum, the guy that founded the company.
Good to know.
The other thing is, you said somehow he got the rights. The reason why they go to Leigh Whannel is because he did The Invisible Man after years of the horror properties just sort of either not performing well at the cinema or, the Dark Universe, I think was the name of the...
Dark Universe, that was it,
universe. Yeah. Either the films didn't perform or they just fell apart in pre-production and never quite moved forward.
There's that great photo of Javier Bardem and Russell Crowe and Tom Cruise all together that were going to be the Dark Universe that it did not happen.
Yeah, so it never happened. But the reason why he's the go-to guy is because he got the rights to The Invisible Man, made that Elizabeth Moss film for $7 million, turned around at box office $144.5 million globally. That's why he's making this movie, because he can do these things on the cheap and draw some audiences. So
yeah, and it was a terrific film. And that movie, like I say, absolutely survived on the back of a really smart script, a really committed performance, and a really clever use of a really clever updating of the old monster movie tropes. This one doesn't afford any of that. I should also point out that Wolfman, ever since American Werewolf in London and The Howling, which was a turning point for werewolf movies, a lot of emphasis has been placed on the practical effects and how the transformation scenes look. You get very little of that in this new version, and that was one of the real disappointments going forward. Clearly, the metaphor and the symbolism, the original symbolism was all to do with alcoholism. The problem being that, when you drink and forget things and do horrible things through the night, that's what a werewolf is. This one is more to do about degenerative disease and the impact it has on the family around you. It's unconvincing in the extreme.
Cool. Let's blitz through. What else have you been watching?
We Live in Time is two big stars, Florence Pugh and Andrew Garfield, in a sappy romantic story about a woman who has a terminal disease. This has been done for every generation since Love Story. In fact, probably before Love Story, the Ryan O'Neal, Ali McGraw film.
Every generation. There's always like 45 films for every generation with a story.
With a story certainly with a story like this one, they always get their big stars getting sick. One of them dies, one of them has to deal with it. Nothing new, nothing fresh about this. There's been a lot of reviews that say the chemistry is really good between the two of them. I didn't think it was at all.
Wait a second, so it's Florence Pugh's character dies, I presume? It's always a woman.
Yeah, it's right there in the trailer.
So when she dies, I presume that by that stage they've had a kid together?
Yep, definitely a kid. Yep.
That's how it goes.
There's got to be a scene where they talk to the kid, and it's kind of played for laughs in this, and then there's other bits that are played for laughs. Plus, it has this structured narrative where they sort of jump back and forth in the relationship. There was talk of some very sexy scenes between the two of them. It does not happen.
Disappointing.
Very disappointing. You know what else I've been watching? A little show called Unstoppable. This is the true story of an American wrestler who made it all the way to the top of the college wrestling scene with only one leg. And this stars Jennifer Lopez as his mother, Jerome, I should have written his name down, who was in Moonlight, who's terrific as the young wrestler. They use special effects to remove his leg in some scenes. They actually lose Anthony Roble, the boy it was based on, in other wrestling scenes. And you've also got Bobby Carnival in there as the abusive father and Michael Pena as the coach. Hits every single inspirational sports story beat it has to. It's a very unremarkable film, but I guess if you're into that sort of thing, you'll find something to like in this. And American Primeval.
Sorry, just to clarify, so Unstoppable doesn't have the train?
No, this is not the Chris Pine, Denzel Washington film. There is no runaway train. God, it needed it, though. I tell you what.
You know what?
What?
Unstoppable, the movie with the train. Man, is that pretty good.
That is a great film. I love that film. American Primeval is the new series on Netflix. Boy, what a cast in this one. Check this out. Betty Gilpin plays a woman who is trying to take her son across the countryside deep into the woods to meet her frontiersman husband. Dane DeHaan is this sort of sneaky Mormon leader. Taylor Kitsch, Jai Courtney, Shea Wiggum are all in there. Its creator is Mark L. Smith, who's on a bit of a roll. He wrote Twisters. He wrote The Revenant all those years ago. And the director of a bunch of these episodes is Peter Berg, who knows how to wield the camera. So this is a big budget, very dirty looking Western with some quality actors in it. The first episode had me hooked. I was a fan of this. Which brings me to the question that everybody wants me to ask. Dan Barrett, what else have you been watching?
Certainly nothing with Dane DeHaan.
It's a great name, isn't it?
He
was on the cusp for a while. He did that Chronicle, that sort of found footage thing where he flies around in the air for a while.
There's a reason Dane DeHaan never took off. There's a reason why Courtney Jai never took off. But anyway,
yeah, they kept trying to do something with Jai Courtney, didn't they? But that never stuck.
Yeah. Anyway, one film, Ghostlight. I don't know if you caught this one, Simon. This was a film that I kept on seeing the trailer every time I saw something at an art house cinema for a couple of months there. I don't even know if it got an Australian release or not. Yeah. Don't think so. It's made its way through to a couple of top 10 lists around the place, and I think absolutely deservedly so. This is a very quiet, very lo-fi movie about, and I don't know how much to tip away on this one, but there's a guy who works as a like road construction guy. He's got some emotional issues that he's working through. He's been through, we'll just say, a tragedy that's impacted his family. And the way that he deals with that, because he can't really deal with it in other ways, because it's a very traditional sort of man's man kind of a guy, keeps his emotions to himself, even if it's tearing him apart inside. He finds his way to a community theatre group who are doing a performance of Romeo and Juliet. anyway, through the course of the story, he ends up, I guess, sort of inadvertently coming out to his family that he's involved in community theatre. But it's a very just it's not emotionally wrought, but it's a emotionally open vein of a movie to see yourself into. What I've said about it probably doesn't make it sound super appealing, but there's just some very honest, very sort of human performances, and by the end of it, you will be absolutely there with, a tear running down your cheek, but it's probably just the allergies in the air. I'm sure that's what it is.
Daddy-daughter movies, do you have trouble? I remember when I had my first daughter, things like I know that's why Whale Rider absolutely impacted me, and there were issues with a couple of other films that had daughters or strong young female leads in them where I just love these movies. Do you think you're going through a little bit of that? Not to detract from your thoughts on Ghostlight. I just...
Honestly, the weakest point in it, I think, is the teenage girl. There's something about her personality on it which is just so thoroughly off-putting that kind of almost derailed the movie for me.
That's teenage.
It may have also been the style performance of the young actress. Not that I think she'd necessarily be bad in something else, but in this, she just didn't really... I don't know, it wasn't a character I wanted to watch in this world so much. Yeah. But anyway, so also I don't think it's that much of a daddy-daughter film. Like, there's certainly those elements in the film, but I don't think that's what powers this one.
What else have you been watching?
Look, we're in daddy-daughter territory right now. There's this one called Good One, which is, again, I don't know if it's got an Australian release. Have you seen this one, Simon?
Have not seen it, know of it. No, it didn't get any sort of cinema run at all.
Yeah. It feels like the sort of film that may have gotten a festival run somewhere at one of the festivals in the country, but certainly not a major release. This one is a father, his teenage daughter who's going off to college soon, and one of his old friends who the three of them are going on a very major hike through some forest area, which is a few hours out of New York City. The two men have a fairly long history together, and there's definitely a lot of tension between the both of them. And so that tension's going on. Meanwhile, this girl is kind of just having to deal with that as she's going on this hike with these sort of two men. I can't say that, there's something I don't want to give away to tip it off, because there's actually not that much more to it than that. It really is people sort of dealing with a lot of the emotional baggage in their life and sort of being confronted with the openness of nature, and that then gives the space for them to be able to explore, I guess, maybe some of the things that are bubbling away under the surface of their lives.
Nice. All right. Yeah. I'll check that one out.
That film is, as the title suggests, a good one.
Good one. Nice review work.
And then the last one is one of my all-time favourite shows, this really underrated little scene comedy called Joe Pera Talks With You. Not available yet in Australia, but I'm hoping the launch of Max in a month or two's time might see that sort of change. But the show's just been removed from Max in the US, and so lots of Joe Pera fans are a little bit distraught by this, because it's one of these great shows you can sort of throw on at the end of the night and have like a really sort of good sort of emotional... Like, it's a chuckle, but there's always something which is a little bit deeper in the show than most. And so lots of people have lost their go-to-bed ritual with Joe Pera Talks With You now being removed from Max. Knowing that was being removed, I had myself a bit of a Joe Pera Talks With You marathon during the week, and boy, that show just doesn't get old. I know you've never watched it, Simon, but you would absolutely eat this one up if you did.
All right, I'll check it on out. Before we go...
I mean, I don't know where, because it's just not available anywhere anymore, because it's just gone.
I'll have to wait. You've piqued my interest, and now you've ripped it out from underneath me.
Don't worry, Simon, I can hook you up, don't worry.
Thank you, mate. We neglected to mention at the top of this show, just in the hours before we recorded, one David Lynch passed away, a director who has made such an impact on my movie watching and on the world of cinema in general, and on television, of course, with the Twin Peaks show. Listing his highlights of films is like just a filmography of the last 40 years of my movie watching. Of course, Dune and Elephant Man and Blue Velvet and Mulholland Drive and Inland Empire. These are all films that I can remember seeing ad infinitum at the movies, then again on VHS, then again on DVD. So it's he was an incredible artist, an incredible visionary, and will remain forever so. So Vale, David Lynch.
Yeah, look, for me, David Lynch is a person who, when you think about his filmography, like his Blue Velvet's probably really the film that everyone sort of thinks of. Like, that is like the most sort of Lynchian.
That was the game changer for sure. That's was the defining one.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the film that's at the top of the bio. Like,
well, I think in hindsight, probably Mulholland Drive is what a lot of people say now. That was probably his, I know that they rated that the best film of the last 50 years or something, one of the BFIs, one of those things. But it was Blue Velvet that announced him to the world, for sure.
Yeah. yeah, I don't know. It might be sort of slight, maybe the addition of like an extra generation or two sort of changes that conversation a little bit. But when I was sort of, discovering film as like a teenager, it was Blue Velvet that, all the cineasts were suddenly talking about and, yeah, making reference to. And because I was slightly a bit too young for Blue Velvet and didn't have like an older brother or sister in the house, that's a film that I literally only really just saw like 2 or 3 years ago for the first time. And, good film, but it's not part of my like cultural DNA in a way that it probably should have been by this point. But to me, David Lynch, it's Twin Peaks all the way through. Like Twin Peaks was the big one crossover success of David Lynch. Like David Lynch is a guy who certainly appeals to the art house crowd and to those that like their cinema a little bit weird, but he's certainly not a mainstream director by any means. And so I think for a lot of mainstream audiences, Twin Peaks is probably the go-to title for most of them. Like that show was such a monster success and such a cultural breakthrough when it took place in 1990. Maybe sort of less well widely received was the revival show in 2017. But look, if you're if you're like a proper TV person or a proper like cinema goer, like you watch that Twin Peaks: The Return series from beginning to end, and yes, you probably scratch your head through a whole lot of it, but also there was so many sort of scenes and memorable moments from that. Least of all, not least of all, I guess most of all, really, episode 8 of that, which is unlike anything I've ever seen on
the infamous episode 8. I can remember where I was when I was watching it. It's extraordinary television. And for him to have that sort of freedom to do that sort of small screen work was as groundbreaking as anything. And you're right, it didn't have the cut-through cultural impact, as you say, that the first series did. But, boy, it was amazing to watch, as was most of his stuff.
As weird as the first season of Twin Peaks was, it was nowhere near as weird as what he was doing with the Return series.
Not at all.
There was some pretty odd stuff going on in that. Yeah. I certainly found my patience being tested a little bit through that series from time to time, but boy, it was a rewarding ride the entire way through. But yeah,
well, that just brings us to an end of another screen watching. Dan Barrett, where can you see and hear and read all your fine outpourings?
alwaysbewatching.com, hit it up, all the details right there. It's a newsletter, it's got all the screen stories, all the TV news stories, it's right there. Sign up, it's free.
Best Movie Year podcast is our other endeavour. We are trying to establish if 1987 was in fact the best movie year ever. Going to be tough to do that. I don't think there's a David Lynch film in amongst that 12-month period. I'll have to scan over the sheet and see if there is. I don't think there is. As we were...
There isn't, but it's okay because... It's okay because Police Academy 4 is part of the rundown.
Problem solved. We can end that podcast right there. We know it was the best movie year ever now. We will be releasing a whole bunch of those going forward in the weeks ahead. You'll hear our thoughts on Tin Men. You'll hear our thoughts on Evil Dead 2 and the aforementioned Police Academy 4, which you are far too excited about for an adult male. Thank you for listening to Screen Watching.
Simon, you forgot the big one. The episode this week is one Raising Arizona.
You son bitch. Okay, yeah, I'm looking forward to that one. That's going to be good.
Anyway, folks, this has been Screen Watching. We'll be back next week to discuss more things that have been on your screens. We'll see you then.